thank you very much for coming to our Island Studies lecture series. On this cold night, it's nice to be thinking about a warm place like Hawaii. And thank you, Emerald, for doing that for us. I'll just do a short intro, tell you a little bit about Emerald. She's currently a second-year student in the Master of Arts in Island Studies program at the University of Prince Edward Island. And as many of you know, the Institute of Island Studies and the Master of Arts in Island Studies program are just down the hall. The Institute is a research, education, public policy institute based here at UPEI. The Master of Arts in Island Studies program is the program that Emerald is doing, and Maggie, and Louise, and Grant is a graduate, and Jim is a professor, and I teach in it, and it's quite interesting, the kinds of work that we do. Before I go on, I'm going to get Jim to stand up. He's also, in addition to being the coordinator of the master's program and the chair of our executive for the Institute, he's also one of the co-chairs of the UNESCO chair, one of the co-holders of the UNESCO chair in Island Studies. So Jim, Randall.
Thanks, Laurie. Thank you all for coming out here as well. And I'm looking forward to this as well, Emerald. I know we've talked about this sort of at the early starts of the program, and I know it's probably evolved a little bit over that time, but I'm looking forward to this. And just for those of you who aren't aware, if anybody, if you're interested in it, or anybody you know is interested, we're accepting applications right now for the Master of Arts Island Studies program. Emerald is a student in the thesis-based program, and Grant is a graduate of the thesis-based program. Both Maggie and Louise are in the new course and work study-based program. And this first year, it's in island tourism. Next year, we'll have a cohort in island tourism and a new cohort in sustainable island communities. So spread the word, and we'd be happy to see you in the program. And the Institute, just as a moment, it has both a local and an international focus. Locally, this is one of the things we do, is to bridge the university to the community and bring us together in a variety of ways. And these kinds of lectures have done that. And we've been hearing about things from both on our island, interesting topics, as well as islands around the world. We also have that international focus, and we act as a facilitator, bringing together networks of people who are working on interesting things around the world. And I won't go into the details, but we'd be happy if you go on the website, you can find out more about that. But even better, if you're not signed up for our newsletter, I'm going to pass this around, and you can sign that up, and you can hear about more of the events coming up, other lectures in the series, public symposia, and some of the accomplishments of our students. So I know some of the people in the front row here are already signed up for it. They can pass it along, and if you aren't signed up, we'd love to send you out not many emails. Thanks.
And as Jim always says, we swear we won't sell it to anybody, even for fundraising. So back to Emerald. She graduated from the University of Waterloo on the Dean's Honours List with a bachelor's degree in English Literature and History. An avid participant in the arts from a very young age, she is now a writer and freelance choreographer and dancer. Emerald was previously a member of the Waterloo Region Records Youth Editorial Board, St. Jerome's Student Activities Committee, and the Canadian Association for Commonwealth Literature and Language Studies. She is currently a member of the International Small Island Studies Association. I guess I am too. The secretary, actually. And the vice president of UPEI's Graduate Student Association. And I can say from seeing all the emails and activities, she's a great vice president. Emerald is the recipient of many awards, including the Joseph Armand Bombardier Canada Graduate Scholarship, the Kitchener's Youth Council Award in Arts and Culture, and second place for children's literature in the Waterloo region. Emerald is also an excellent traveling companion. Last summer, we all traveled together to the ASISA conference in the island of Terschelling in the Netherlands, and we had a great time. So I'll pass it over to you, Emerald. Thank you.
So this is sort of a last-minute addition. This is a video I put together for the Shirk Storytellers Scholarship last month. So I'll play it. I apologize if you can't hear it. If not, enjoy the pictures that will pop up.
on the Big Island. The Big Island greeted me with an outstanding view of Mauna Kea. The mountain is home to the birthplace of Hawaii, where the Earth Mother, Papahanaumoku, reaches up to meet the Sky Father, Wakaya. The mountain is also home to 13 telescopes, built on top of sacred Hawaiian land. The TMT is said to be the 14th and last telescope, though construction has been protested and installed since 2014. My research trip to Hawaii, funded by SHRC, was like nothing I had ever experienced before. I spent 6 hours on Black Friday wandering through and studying the many exhibits in the Imaloa Astronomy Center, a center and planetarium that strives to combine the ancient Hawaiians' wayfinding and early astronomy practices with current Western astronomy. I went to local farmers markets where conversations of TMT were whispered behind tables of fresh pineapples and papayas. I witnessed beach blessing ceremonies and danced at Uncle Robert's, a local music, food, and culture scene on some of the last remaining Hawaiian land. I didn't become a Hawaiian, but I listened to their stories. I listened to their pride of Mauna Kea and the gods and goddesses that lived there. I listened to frustrations over the constant telescope construction and eradication of Hawaiian sacred land. I listened to praise of the 30-meter telescope and the new opportunities for better education and economic growth it would bring to the island. I listened, I observed, I conducted interviews with Western astronomers and Hawaiians alike. I thought my story would end when I finally reached Hawaii. Looking back, I realized that was just the beginning. Now my story of loving and working to get to Hawaii has transformed. This is not just my story anymore. Now I get to share 9 other stories as part of a look into astronomy culture on the Big Island. The exciting, the disappointing, the polarizing, and the compromising.
Yeah, that's it. I unfortunately can't take credit for that. Kelsey made a lot of it.
Good job.
Alright. Anyway, I thought I'd come here to talk to you today about my thesis research. The project is entitled More Than Sun and Pineapples, a look into the culture of astronomical sciences in Hawaii. And as Lori mentioned, I am a Master's of Arts Island Studies student here. So I'll start with a little bit about me. Most of this was covered, but I was born and raised in Kitchener-Waterloo, so southwestern Ontario. Moved around a little bit there, but for the most part stayed within the region. And then I went to the University of Waterloo for my undergraduate and graduated 2 years ago with a Bachelor of Arts degree in Honors English Literature and History. In August 2017, my family packed ourselves into 2 cars and did a road trip to PEI. Then they left me here. And I started the Masters of Arts Island Studies program. So I have wanted to go to Hawaii since I was very little. This is very important because everything I have done to get to that point has been done out of spite. Because my mom promised me when I was very little that she would take me to Hawaii. That didn't pan out exactly the way she had hoped. So yeah, pretty much everything since that point has been me trying to get there. And I went, so I accomplished that. But when my parents told me that we couldn't afford to go to Hawaii when I was younger, they did fill me with the next best thing. So I had lots of Hawaiian birthday parties and music and Hawaiian art in my room and things like that. So it's a obsession, I suppose, that has been with me for a long time. And after being there and seeing the culture firsthand, the love has only grown. So I want to give some context about the project. When I was in my 3rd year of university, I took a history class where the final project was to take a current or contemporary issue and trace the historical significance about it. This was in 2016, so the big protest of the 30-meter telescope had just happened in June of the previous year. So I looked at a very specific 2 protests on Mauna Kea's summit, and I traced that back to the annexation of Hawaii in 1898, looking at the relationship between Americans and Hawaiians. In my 4th year of university, I took a Global Indigenous Histories class, so I continued that project, looking at those same protests but from a a focus of the Hawaiians' perspective and what the Hawaiians' perspective has been since. And then when I applied to the MACE program, I had intended on continuing to look at the 30-meter telescope and the entangled identities of the Hawaiians who, specifically university Hawaiian students who were studying astronomy and how their identities revolved around that. Did not pan out the way I had hoped, so instead I studied the culture and the impact of astronomical sciences on Hawaii. But I'll get to that in a second. So Mauna Kea is about 14,000 feet tall. When measured from the base, its base and the sea floor to the peak, it is one of the tallest, I think it is the tallest mountain in the world. It is by far the tallest peak in Hawaii. It is also the birthplace of creation, so it is where the Sky Father Wakaya meets the Earth Mother Papahanaumoku. Many Hawaiians refer to Mauna Kea as their grandmother or one of their ancestors. It is also the site of 13 telescopes, which are very clearly visible from Hilo. No matter where you are, you can see all 13 of them. So the 30-meter telescope, or the TMT, is proposed to be the 14th telescope. In the recent court rulings and compromises, it has been ruled that 3 telescopes will be shut down before the TMT can be built. So it won't be the 14th telescope anymore, but it will be an 11th. Or it still will be the 14th telescope, but there won't be 14 on the mountain at a time. There will only be 11. And it has also been ruled that it will be the last telescope to be built on Mauna Kea, which we will talk about a bit more. So while studying the issues surrounding the TMT, I was seeing that astronomy was popping up everywhere in the day-to-day life. So there's observatories, museums, libraries, university courses, organizations, day camps, events, outreach programs, societies, all with the main theme of astronomy and sharing their love for astronomy and educating the public about astronomy. So that's what I chose to focus on. I went into this project with 3 research questions. Number 1, why is astronomy such an important part of Hawaiian culture and life on the islands? Number 2, how are the Hawaiians past as wayfinders and early astronomers integrated into the public's knowledge about astronomy? And number 3, how are the relationships between Hawaiian culture and history and Western astronomy navigated within the community? So those were my research questions and the objectives that I wanted to get out of it. The main one was, what is it about the islands that fosters such a strong interest in astronomy? I have never had an interest in astronomy. It never seemed to be a popular thing where I was from. I was actually the kid who would cry when black holes and space and stars were mentioned, and honestly there's a few interviews that I tuned out a little bit when they started getting too in-depth about that stuff, but it's all recorded, so I have it. But I've never had a love for astronomy. I've never had it accessible to me in the same way that it is in Hawaii, specifically on the Big Island. So what I really wanted to figure out was why that is. What is it about these islands that attract astronomers and hobbyist astronomers and people who just like looking at the stars? The other objective that I was hoping to get out of this are what sort of onto-epistemological divides become evident when analyzing and critiquing a predominantly Western field of study. So basically I am looking at different ways of knowing and different knowledge systems. So in this particular case we have Western ways of knowing astronomy and we have Hawaiian ways of knowing astronomy. And what is that relationship between them? Why is there a divide? What is the divide? And just analyzing and critiquing that is something that I will continue to do in my analysis process. And then it is a predominantly Western field of study right now. So I just wanted to see how that would come into play as well. And then finally, studying how astronomy is presented and shared on the Big Island. Like I said, it's not something that has been accessible to me growing up. And they have young kids in Hawaii going to astronomy-themed day camps. So how are they sharing astronomy and teaching about astronomy in a way that would make like a 6-year-old Emerald be interested in it? to get out of this project. This is all the lead up to the trip. So I'll just talk quickly about my methods and methodology. It's completely qualitative research. Honestly, I just don't do well with numbers, so I'm better with stories and sharing themes and stories. So I worked mainly as an observer in Hilo on the Big Island, so that's the main city there. It's right at the base of Mauna Kea and on Mauna Loa. So that's where I was living for a few weeks and studying. I also did interviews in the surrounding area, so outside Pahoa, which is the jungle about 45 minutes away from Hilo. I spent a lot of time at the Imaloa Astronomy Center. On Black Friday, I had the whole place to myself because everybody else was shopping. And they were kind of surprised when I was there for the whole day. And then also Mauna Kea. While I never got to the summit of Mauna Kea, I did drive around the base and up to the halfway point multiple times. I also was using semi-structured interviews, so I had a list of questions that I wanted to ask, but I was open to letting the interview go where it needed to go. I wanted a mix of professional and amateur astronomers, female and male, and Hawaiian and Western, but I didn't set out to get this ratio specifically because I wanted it to come naturally. I wanted to see who was involved, not me seeking out the few people who were. And any of the ratios I collected from my interviews is going to be really important in the analysis phase, so I didn't want to tamper with that. But what it ended up being was 60% female, which surprised me, 40% male, and 1/3 of my participants were of Hawaiian descent. So my literature review is still ongoing, and I'm pretty sure it will be ongoing until I defend it. It is a very current topic and something that I get about 20 Google alerts every week about something new that's happening with the TMT, and that affects everything else that I've looked at. But the main theories that I'm looking into are ontoepistemological divides, as I mentioned before. So these are the different ways of knowing, specifically Hawaiian ways of knowing versus Western ways of knowing. And I wanted to analyze our set of assumptions and how we talk about something familiar. So for myself personally, being from a Western world, Western descent, Euro-American descent, I've always thought of astronomy as the science, the Big Bang. To me, it's never had, and this is different for everybody, but to me it's never had any connection to religion or creation in that spiritual sense. And those are my assumptions, but the people I talked to, both on the Hawaiian side and the Western side, had different assumptions. Everybody had a different set of assumptions. So how do we have to analyze our own set of assumptions to be able to understand how somebody else is looking at a topic? So why is it that I don't see it connected with spiritual creation, but for somebody else that's the main aspect of astronomy? So I'm really excited to be diving into that a little bit more. The other is the self-other dichotomy. So this is something I talked about a lot in my undergrad, specifically in English literature, and it's something I wanted to bring here. This is where my interview ratios become important because I'm critiquing the hierarchies of what I saw through my interviews. So who's the self and who's the other? Usually this is represented as West versus other, the other. So what is this othering and who is being othered? That one was a pretty easy one to answer. And then who's running the dominant narrative and why are they? And then finally integrating the islandist aspect, as this is a island studies thesis. Something I've toyed around with a bit is breaking the self-other dichotomy into mainlands and islands. We always see, we've talked about in some of my classes last year about seeing mainlands as the default and islands as the other. Why is that? Why is our assumption about the world revolve around land rather than water? And so how can I take that self-other narrative and break it down to mainlands and islands? especially with my own personal experience being a mainlander, moving to an island to do research about a different island. Where do I come into play with that? And am I even allowed to be telling these stories? It's also really interesting to look at the relationships between islands and space. Both are very isolated in different ways. And that's about as far as I've gotten, but I think it'll be cool. And then the parallels between island discourse and post-colonial theory, which kind of comes back to the self-other and ways of knowing divides. That's all the boring stuff. Here's my trip to Hawaii. So I spent 2.5 weeks researching astronomy. I went to Hawaii on November 13th, 2018, and I was there until December 13th, 2018. Through Lori, I actually made a contact on the Big Island, Marina, and she was great. I stayed with her the first few days. She fed me my first meal in 48 hours, which was great. I was living off of granola bars for a very long time. It takes a long time to get to Hawaii, in case you're wondering. When I was staying with her, she began reaching out to some of her colleagues at the university, because she is a teacher, professor there. And so she actually put me in contact with the first 2 or 3 people that I interviewed, and from there it very quickly became, I would sit in an interview, and by the end I had 3 more people that I needed to talk to. And some people did recommend the same person, so I knew that they were really somebody I needed to talk to. But it kind of worked out a lot easier than I thought. I was really afraid that I would get there and nobody would want to talk to me. So having somebody to set up the first 2 interviews was great, and then once I got there, it just kind of snowballed from there. And so the breakdown ended up being 3 astronomy professors / professional astronomers, 1 high school teacher who taught the first astronomy high school course in Hawaii, 1 astronomy student who's actually now doing her master's in education, 1 director of an astronomy center, 1 navigator, 1 support technician / astronomy photographer, and 1 outreach coordinator and social media director at the telescope facility. So there's a lot there, and they all had very different backgrounds. Here's some pictures. The first one in the top is actually not from the Big Island. It's from my vacation on Oahu, but it says aloha, and I felt like that was a good representation of my time there. This bottom one here, that was my first day getting there. Fun story, there's a bus that goes across the island. It costs $3 to get on with your luggage. Doesn't show up on time, and if you have luggage, they tell you you can't get on. And then you're stranded on a highway in the middle of Hawaii, running on 3 hours of sleep, not quite sure how to get across the island. So I rented a truck. Spent all my money on that truck. And drove across the island. But I got to drive towards Mauna Kea for 2 hours, and just watching it come into view. Mauna Kea was in front of me and Maui was behind me. The ocean in Maui. That up there is from the Black Kahana Sands Beach. Kahana Black Sands Beach. So that's all volcanic rock, but it was my favorite place on the island. And it was a great place to go after doing an interview and just kind of like reflect on what themes had come up. This is the Imaloa Astronomy Center. It sits on the top of Mauna Loa, or near the top of Mauna Loa. Again, I had no money for taxis and Ubers, so it was a fun walk every time I had an interview up there. Lots of fun, lots of great stuff there. This triangle cone is actually their planetarium, which was amazing. They have really great shows there, and one of the people that I interviewed actually is their technician as well. So I kind of got the inside scoop on how the shows are created. And then, of course, a selfie of me in front of the Astronomy Center. So just to continue, all of the interviews that I conducted were between 45 minutes and 2 hours. Most of them were an hour to an hour and a half. There were 2 people who loved to talk to me, and I had to cut them off at 2 hours just because I was also on a time limit. And the 45-minute interview was actually disappointing in the sense that it was only 45 minutes. I actually blew through all my questions in the first 20 minutes. It was just not somebody who was a big conversationalist. and listening back on the transcript, it just sounded like a lot of my voice. So he said some good things in the interview, and I wish he had elaborated on them. But it was what it was. So I mostly did these interviews in personal offices or classrooms. So either classrooms at the high school that I went to, not that I went to, that I was visiting and went to, or the University of Hawaii Hilo campus. I met in a couple of offices at the Imaloa Astronomy Center and at the Gemini base facility. And then one met with me at a local restaurant, just because an office wasn't an option. So my questions started about the interest in astronomy and what first caught their attention. So I asked them to tell me a bit about themselves. I asked what first got them interested in astronomy, and then what has held their attention over time. Why are they still in this field of study that some people chose when they were 6 or 7 years old? And then that kind of transitioned into what everybody in the interviews called my big question, because as soon as I asked it, they were like, why didn't you just lead with this? This is what you've been wanting to ask. But I asked if they were following TMT protests and other issues surrounding Mauna Kea. So I was trying to understand what the climate and the environment between the Hawaiians and astronomers is like right now. And then I finished with a question about how Hawaiian and Western ways of knowing are navigated. So I just wanted to go through some of my preliminary findings. Just by a show of hands, how many people have heard of the TMT protests before this presentation? Okay. So the very first thing I learned, and the most important thing I learned, was that the TMT, through external media, represented to people who are not on the Big Island, is very misleading. All of the articles I have read from 2015 onward have shown it as being a very polarizing issue where people are either completely for the telescope or completely against the telescope, and nobody can agree on anything. It's not like that at all. A lot of people fall into the middle ground of the telescope would be great, but we need to learn how to respect the mountain first. Or the mountain is being desecrated, but I understand the importance of this telescope and what it can do for not astronomy, but for Hawaiian economy. So that was really fascinating. And also the media within the Big Island is very different as well. I was reading the local newspapers there and watching some local news stations, and it was painting a different picture than my interviews were, but it was not nearly as polarizing as, say, the Economist article that I read in 2016 was. So that was just something that was very interesting and became very clear right away that this is an issue that a lot of people outside of Hawaii don't totally understand what's happening. And a few of the interviewees stated that the opinions were more polarizing in 2014 and 2015 when the protests first began, but after that it died down and everybody sort of settled into some middle ground. The other thing I heard in the interviews of people who were strong supporters of TMT was that you're always going to hear more noise from the people against it. The people who are for it don't feel comfortable necessarily speaking up about why they support it. There were a few comments made from people who support the TNT that said they felt as if they've been attacked, which I thought was interesting because that's exactly what all the Hawaiians are saying and nobody wants to listen to them. Just my opinion. So that will be another interesting thing to analyze as well. The second main thing that I have found is that education was a reoccurring theme. Completely without prompt, every single one of my interview participants mentioned education. And they all mentioned it in the same way. And by the fourth interview, I was like, why do I not have a question about this? And started trying to form one. Because going into this project, education was the last thing on my mind. It did not seem to be crucial to what I was trying to study. But from the very first interview right until the last one, without prompt, education was always mentioned. Specifically, that better or different education was needed to improve the economy. The Hawaiians that I interviewed said that Hawaii's economy cannot continue to run and be supported just by tourism, because that is destroying the island, and it's making it harder for Hawaiians to stay in their home. Instead, they end up flying out to the mainland, moving to the mainland, and finding a job that pays them better than being the busboy at a 4-star hotel. It was also interesting to talk with Marina. One of her recent projects is on the tourism economy, and she was saying that many of the people of Hawaiian descent who are professors at the University of Hawaii across all the campuses, many of them also work at resorts on the weekend as well. And she mentioned that one of her case studies looks at one of her other colleagues who comes from a Euro-American background going and staying at one of these resorts and not realizing that it was her colleague that was giving her drinks all night. And looking at the inequality and wage gap there. That doesn't really fit in with my topic completely, but it's interesting to note that it's not just me that found this, and it's an issue. And the economy, in order to succeed and continue to grow, needs to not just be relying on tourism, and many saw astronomy as the way to diversify the economy. There also needs to be better education about the perception of the telescopes, as well as a better understanding of Mauna Kea's sacredness. Some people mentioned that it would be great if anybody who was working on Mauna Kea had to go through a 6-month cultural training session before they were allowed up on the mountain. Yeah. Something else I found really interesting when I was looking at the ways of knowing was Western astronomy was always referred to as the science, and Hawaiian astronomy was always referred to as the culture, including in Imaloa Astronomy Center, where the two are supposed to be bridged together. It was always, here's the science exhibit, and that's the cultural stuff on that side. There do seem to be small changes and noticeable changes happening in this regards, but it's interesting that the ways of knowing are not, one is not seen as valid or as valid as the other. So I just wanted to finish with a little bit of talk about the future of astronomy. And this can be an open discussion as well. I will start off, but if you have anything to add on, please just jump in. So the big question is, where does astronomy go from here? You have a media portraying it as being people completely against or people completely for astronomy. You have the reality that is, most people sit in the middle ground of astronomy is great, but there needs to be big changes, or these big changes need to be made so that astronomy can continue to grow. So where does astronomy go from here? I think personally it is a great alternative to tourism, and it seems to be a general consensus that that's something that a lot of people would like to see. Astronomy pays better than tourism. Astronomy also leads to better education for the general public, instead of just being Hawaiian and thinking that one of these days I'm either going to have to leave or be working in a hotel. So astronomy is seen as an alternative to tourism and as a way to kind of improve the general population's education. We also see with astronomy that 3 observatories are closing on Mauna Kea. I actually talked to one of my interview participants is actually the lead on one of those telescopes that is closing. And they're really struggling with that to figure out what to do next. And also this project, this observatory that he's been working on for 12 years is all of a sudden getting closed down. I understand both sides. I understand why it needs to be closed down, but at the same time I understand how disappointing it would be to see your work just completely collapse in on itself in a way. So does this mean that more observatories are going to be closed? Who decided what observatories got to stay and which ones didn't? Why those 3? The other thing that, when you look at astronomy's future, we're in 2019 and the TMT is supposed to be the last telescope to ever be built on Mauna Kea. What happens in 100 years when there's new technological advancements? Does this ruling stay final because of protests that have admittedly been going on since the first telescope in 1960 something? But if the relationship between Hawaiians and Americans, or astronomers and the general public, improves, is it fair to put a complete no more telescope stamp on something that happened in the last 50 years? By saying that TMT is the last telescope to be built on Mauna Kea, is the advancement of astronomy being inhibited? I know that a lot of people come to Mauna Kea and to the Big Island because great astronomy work and advancements are being done there. If the TMT becomes the last telescope, does that mean that people who are interested in astronomy are going to have to flee elsewhere? And then what does that mean for the Hawaiians who want astronomy to be an alternative to tourism? I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that. Just kind of an open-ended question at this point.
Comments, questions for Emerald?
Yes.
I'm curious if in any of the interviews or any of the research that you did you see any change in how, especially people from the Western culture, hopefully respect the traditional cultures due to the positive effects of pop culture, such as like Moana, for example?
Moana was mentioned in an interview, and I was very excited about that. Yeah, so in the interview that Moana was mentioned, the participant said that his young daughters watch Moana, and because of that, they've been able to see aspects of Hawaiian culture from a very young age. So that's had a positive impact. Another person that I talked to, one of the professional astronomers, went on a very long tangent about how astronomers on Twitter were disproving the TMT and supporting the Hawaiians in the protest. And she said that was just done for likes and popularity. So it has changed her opinion about her colleagues. It was also mentioned that TMT protests is just a bandwagon that everybody jumped on just so that they could hate something. But then I had somebody else mention that she had worked in a telescope on the summit many years ago and saw a protest at the time that had just been one older man sitting there saying why he disliked what they were doing. He wasn't actively fighting them or anything. He was very quiet and respectful in their protest. And they were able to talk with him to see what it was about their research and their facility that was hurting him, and tried to better that. And the TMT actually took a lot of that into consideration. It's not built on sacred ground, the location that they chose. It's still on the summit, but it's not built on a specific area that's known to be sacred. The current lease for an observatory on Mauna Kea is $1 a year. TMT is willing to pay $1 million, and much of that money goes back into the education system. So it kind of, I don't know if that really answered, but it kind of went both ways. Some people just like to hate things just because they want to hate things and they're stuck in their way. Other people are seeing how that's bringing about positive change. Other people are seeing how it's bringing change that they don't want to see. It's very mixed.
Great.
What does TMT mean?
30-meter telescope. So the lens that they're using is going to be 30 meters across. It will be the biggest mirrored telescope, I believe, in the world as of right now, or one of the two largest, because I think there was one just built in Chile.
Who controls or who owns these various telescopes?
Yeah, so Mauna Kea is owned by the University of Hawaii, which is its own issue in and of itself. Some of the people who worked at the University of Hawaii mentioned that there was a lot of management issues. and disrespectful ways in which the University of Hawaii is running that mountain, and how that's one of the issues that needs to be addressed. As for the actual observatories, it depends on which one. There's a Canada, France, Hawaii telescope, so we have some say in that one. NASA owns a bunch of them. Different astronomy companies from different places in the world kind of pool in together. I do not know offhand who owns the TMT though. I know California has a big bid on it, and I know Canada did at some point, but I'm not sure if they've since pulled out or not.
A couple of questions. One is that why do you have so many telescopes in Hawaii? Is because there's no like tourism around it. And how do telescopes take in money to be an alternative to tourism?
So the reason that the telescopes there's so many on Mauna Kea is because it's the highest, clearest, and driest point in the world. Having driven past it, it's actually above the clouds. So when I drove across the island, the clouds were eye level with me. It's very weird to drive through. Again, I was on the phone with Kelsey. I was like, I'm driving through clouds right now. So the summit is actually above the clouds. Very dry, very clear nights. Hilo has almost, I think it's like 20% light pollution. Coming from a big city, it was amazing to step outside and see how many stars there are. I've noticed it even from moving from outside Toronto to here, the difference, but then going to Hilo was absolutely astonishing. As for how the telescopes will bring in money, the research that they're doing, that the observatories are set up, and then astronomers pay to apply to get to use the observatory for a set amount of time. And then the people who work on the base facilities, so those are the ones that are on Mauna Loa near the Imaloa Astronomy Center. They do a lot of outreach events, so any money that they get from day camps or daily programs, all of that kind of goes towards the telescopes, but also towards continuing the education, is my general understanding of it.
I have probably way more questions than I can get across
Okay.
here, so I'll try to boil it down. Early on, you mentioned that you attempted to do research with university students who were studying astronomy, but there were some problems.
Yes.
Just curious if you can share about that.
Yeah. So one of the main problems was that in order to do research with the University of Hawaii students, I needed to get permission from the IFA at the University of Hilo. In order to do that, I needed a co-supervisor there. I already have 2 co-supervisors, and a 3rd co-supervisor seemed like we were getting too many cooks in the kitchen, in my opinion. And so that was one of the reasons that I was less willing to go about with that. The other thing, my supervisors and I had put together a little sort of spiel about my project that we sent out to a couple of contacts that we had in Hawaii, and the way that information was passed along to the community without me having known about it did not paint me in a very good light. So the decision was scrapped and I went a different way.
Those things happen.
Yes.
The other, one of the other points I wanted to raise was about, there's a whole bunch of literature, I don't know if you're familiar with it, called kind of native science. There's a whole push, mostly on I guess the mainland side.
Okay.
But there's a book called Native Science by Gregory Kahete.
Okay, I have not.
And then there's a book which I work with the Blackfoot people in southwestern Alberta. There was a physicist who went there, I think his name's David Peat. And
Okay.
he wrote a book called Blackfoot Physics.
Okay, I think I've read some of that one. But
Okay.
not all of it.
So there's an interesting literature there that kind of
Yeah.
works hard to find common ground between indigenous and scientific
Yeah.
perspectives on the cosmos and,
That would be
you know.
great to look into.
So this is interesting stuff. And on top of that, there's a whole, I mean, you know, the mountain is really interesting for me.
Yeah,
So I'm really curious of all the different ways that different groups of people view the mountain and relate to the mountain through not just the way, what they think and believe about it or in their mythology, but also in their actions
yeah.
and rituals, perhaps.
Yes. So a lot of Hawaiians will, so the mountain is seen, as I said, is where the Papahanaumoku and Wakaya meet, because the mountain touches the sky. The mountain is also seen as being the umbilical cord towards creation. So the Hawaiian people have come from the umbilical cord. So a lot of Hawaiians, after they give birth, they take the umbilical cord and they go and plant it on Mauna Kea, and each family has their own designated area, and there's usually a rock of some sort that has been on the mountain for as long as they can remember that they go towards to perform their rituals. Some of the rituals include asking the mountain how she's doing, asking Mauna Kea, how she's doing, singing to her, offering blessings to get permission to use the mountain for whatever purposes. There's actually a podcast that I've started listening to. It's called Offshore. It's on Google Play and Spotify, for sure, and iTunes. Their second season is a 6-part series on the mountain, looking at it from both the Western perspective and the Hawaiian perspective. So a lot of the spirituality and importance of Mauna Kea is covered in the first 45-minute episode. So I would highly recommend that. It's called Offshore. Yes?
A couple of questions. The second one's a history one, so I'll save that for, because I know you like histories.
Yes.
But the first one is the 3 observatories that are closing down. Are they closing down because of protests? Are they closing down because they're technologically now inferior and outdated? Or is there another combination of those reasons?
So recently, this issue between, there's so much to go back to. So in 2014, there was supposed to be groundbreaking on the 30-meter telescope. That was protested and stalled until 2015, where there was a massive blockade. Many people got arrested. It hasn't been touched since then. It went through the Supreme Courts to see if the 30-meter telescope could actually be built or not. And there was the very vocal side that we've probably all heard of, some of the Native Hawaiians who were actively protesting that. So that went through the Supreme Court, and in November, when I got there, it was ruled that literally the day I got there, it was ruled that the TMT was going to be built on the mountain. As an agreement for the TMT being built on the mountain, one of the compromises was that 3 of the observatories had to be closed down because there couldn't be 14 on the mountain at a time. I don't know how they picked those 3. It probably has to do with more out-of-date research. But in all honesty, I found out this news right as I got to Hawaii. I was trying to spend my time booking interviews that I didn't look into it as closely as I probably should have. But I think it is a combination of a Supreme Court ruling and older technology.
Sure. Now the history question, and I think you alluded to it near the start of your talk, and that is looking at wayfinders,
Yes.
and they're, of course, looking at the stars was only one aspect of their navigation sort of techniques.
Yeah.
And Hawaii was, from my understanding, was a very different part of the Oceania than the rest of the area where Polynesians sort of went. So I'm curious as to whether it's your literature review or whether it's sort of part of your data that you're gathering, that you're sort of going to be contrasting those two in terms of wayfinders' interpretation of the stars and astronomy, and Europeans at that time, their also interpretation of the stars.
Yeah. So it did come up a little bit in my literature review, but it came up a lot in my interviews with people of Hawaiian descent. One of those is the in-house navigator at the Imaloa Astronomy Center, and he led the Hukuleila, which was in 2014 to 2017. They recreated the voyage around the world using just Hawaiian ways of navigation. So that includes moon location, tidal waves.
Lots of things.
Yeah, lots of things. And one of the aspects is the stars. And I'm going to butcher this, but a lot of it is you put your hand up along a certain. I took a class to learn it, but I don't remember anything. You put your hand along, I believe it's Orion constellation, and you can locate the main star to like navigate you towards wherever you're going. They also do it in Moana. So the hand symbol and testing the waters for the right current gets you in the right direction. There was a whole section in the Imaloa Astronomy Center just about the different aspects of wayfinding and the history of it, going to how they built the canoe, to how they used the canoe, to how they got from one place to the other, and how they passed along their knowledge of the stars. Something else that is really cool is the, I can't remember the name of it offhand, but it's one of the longest chants, one of the oldest and longest chants that's still around today, and it's the chant of creation in Hawaii. So it talks about how the earth came from Po, which is darkness, and from that there was an explosion of light. So this is basically talking about the Big Bang, long before the Big Bang was the Big Bang. And that is discredited often as being culture. So there's that. But that was also the chant, if you could hear the video, part of that chant was that chant. I've lost my train
No,
of
that's
thought with
good.
your question.
Did you get a chance to go to the Bishop's Museum in Oahu? Because that has I know Lori and I went there during the conference. That was had a wonderful wayfinding exhibit there as well.
Oahu was a whirlwind of days, and unfortunately we just couldn't locate a way to the museum. But I had friends that went there, heard about it from them.
Thanks.
Louise?
Emerald, the observatories and the telescopes or whatever, like, if they're already there, they're closing, but is all of whatever they are being removed from the mountain? It is, okay.
Yes.
So it's freeing up space on the mountain.
And a lot of those were built on sacred sites. So
Okay.
like I said, the TMT is not being built
Yes.
on a sacred site. As far as I'm aware, nobody's told me it's a sacred site. They did a lot of research into that before they went to pick that site. But the other telescopes that were built in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s
Okay.
didn't care.
Yeah.
And so, yes, they are being removed to both free up space and to free up the sacred space. Yeah. And I should mention that before I went into this research, I was very anti-TMT. Very, very anti-TMT. Because of the media that was portrayed to me. Since going, I see the value of it, and I see the value of advancing astronomy and as using astronomy as an alternative for the economy, having been there firsthand, and paying $2,000 for an apartment for 2 weeks, but so I see what the economy is like there now. So my opinion is much more middle ground. I think there needs to be a lot of changes before that mountain can be used respectfully. And I think there needs to be a lot of changes with how it's being managed. Hawaii, the University of Hawaii had a 60-year lease on the mountain. It is up, and they just hit year 51. I know, because it's the same age as my dad. So they have 9 years to renew this lease, and it's a huge deal because if University of Hawaii doesn't renew the lease, anything that's built on Mauna Kea under that lease gets deconstructed and taken down as well. So TMT does not want to build on Mauna Kea until the lease is secured because it's a $1.4 billion project to build that on a mountain after 5 years of trying to get it on that mountain, just to have it be taken down in 6. Nobody wants that to happen. That being said, a lot of people have a lot of problems with how University of Hawaii is running that mountain. Part of it being the fact that you can lease a space for $1 a year. That's not starting at $1, that is $1 a year. Yes.
Regarding that, and you said that it's been $1 a year, but for TMT, they're actually offering $1 million.
Yeah,
per
because
year.
they're trying really hard to get the community on their side, I think. And they're showing that they are going about this in a way that future telescopes could be going about this. It is a really great location for what the 30-meter telescope hopes to accomplish. And so they see the value, I'm assuming they see the value in paying the respect to the community and getting the community on board.
Is it the community that receives that $1 million?
It gets back into the community in some way. So a lot of it does go towards education. So scholarships for astronomy degrees or funding for better outreach programs.
Louise and then Shane.
Okay.
What do they hope to accomplish with the TMT?
The TNT would allow astronomers to see back to the beginning of time.
Hey!
It would allow us to see the Big Bang. That's how far back it would go. I don't understand that because I didn't take physics or astronomy, but that is what it will do. However, that is possible.
Okay. I'm just gonna take your word for it.
So recently, maybe it was just a couple or a few months ago, there was the, I don't know, the tournament, or something like that. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah.
So I wonder about this, do you know the story behind how that, I don't know, alien probe or meteorite or whatever it is, interstellar object, got a Hawaiian name? Or
Oh, yes, I do know this.
okay, yeah, I'm curious what the behind the scenes story is.
Yeah, so I talked to the director of the Imaloa Astronomy Center, and her and her family are, there's so much backstory to all these questions, I apologize. Her and her family are very important in renewing the Hawaiian language. It was a language that was on the brink of extinction. For a language to not be considered extinct, there has to be 3 generations of native speakers. The generation that is currently in kindergarten is the 3rd generation of these native speakers, so it is very close to being extinct and very newly renewed. So through that and through the idea of renewing the Hawaiian language, there is an outreach program. I think it's Astro Day, but it could be one of the other ones, where elementary school students are paired with astronomers, and the elementary students get to say what sort of things they'd like to research. So I guess one of the groups that paired up with one of the astronomers was researching meteorites. And so the astronomer does the research, but the children have like a huge investment in it. They found this meteorite. It went to whoever it goes to, NASA or somebody. And the director of the Imaloa Astronomy Center, working as like part of the group that's renewing the Hawaiian language, mentioned that because it was a discovery made in Hawaii, it'd be great if it could have a Hawaiian name, and then the kids who helped discover it got to name it. Yeah. And so they're hoping, this is one of the small yet noticeable changes in which Hawaiian ways of knowing are becoming more accepted, is the hope that there's actually Hawaiian names for all of the major astronomy discoveries that have been made on Mauna Kea, and the hope that with any further ones, they will all have a Hawaiian name as well.
What was the name? I missed it.
I
I
don't
was
know.
referring actually to, I think maybe a different example.
Okay.
There was the interstellar object. Like, it's one of this Harvard astronomer proposed that it was an alien probe or something like that.
Oh, I might
And it
have
has a
Oh, so
Hawaiian name,
excited.
a lot more, just
Yeah.
from afar or something like that.
Hmm.
So I wondered if it was a case of cultural appropriation where the astronomers in Hawaii are just using the Hawaiian language, or if it is something more like
Yeah.
your example of meteor.
Well, I would love to say it was what the answer I just gave, but I actually don't know. I missed that one.
Thank you.
But that was one of the asteroids that was discovered. Backstory to that.
Any other comments or questions? Maggie?
You mentioned at the start that you could say you're not a space or astronomy sort of so I guess if you're kind of first
Yeah.
few years. Do you think that that's, or how do you think that that is, I guess, do you think that that has helped you sort of be in the middle of the two different ways of knowing because you don't have a really sort of strong leaning
Yes.
straight away?
Yeah, because I didn't go into it liking astronomers or astronomy. And then through that, I got to kind of discover the wonder of astronomy through people who have been doing it their whole life. But I had already kind of gone into this project with my own bias of being strongly supportive of the Hawaiians and the history that the Hawaiians, because I've always looked at this from a historical aspect, not an astronomical aspect. So the history is horrible and is not very kind to the Hawaiians. So I went into it with a strong bias that way. But my first 3 interviews were from 2 professional astronomers and the high school teacher who taught the first astronomy class. And so right away I was kind of hit with the wonder and awe of astronomy. It still freaks me out. I still do not like thinking about black holes and the fact that in a billion years the sun is going to like explode. I know I'm going to be dead by then, but it still terrifies me. But I do think it helped me become more of like a middle ground and being completely removed from the situation. And I mentioned that to a few people. I was like, how is my perspective as seeing this from away and being an outsider affecting my research here? A lot of it was you're seeing it with a fresh set of eyes.
And so did Hawaii meet your expectations?
Yes, yeah. I almost didn't get on the plane to come back. The only reason I did is because my last credit card got declined. I was out of money and had a plane ticket bought already.
Well,
So-
Emerald, thank you very
No
much. This
problem.
was wonderful and something that we've never had before in our lecture series that is on a really important topic on an island so far away from us. So thank you very much.
No problem.
Small token gift of our appreciation.
Potatoes.
Thank you. I mean, I'd be happy if they came this. I'm out.
Uh-oh, you hungry?
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. Island Studies Press's latest book. Just before you go, our next lecture will be on Tuesday, March 19th, so 4 weeks from tonight, featuring Joss Plourde, talking about From Policy to Action, Lessons from SAMHSA, which is an island in Denmark. And Jocelyn Plourde is a recent graduate in the Master of Arts in Island Studies program, so this is all about alternate energy and the work that he discovered on this little tiny island of SAMHSA in Denmark. So thank you again for coming, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.